Hey everyone, this is Mike Diercksen with Proactive, and you're listening to the Building Bite Podcast. Tune in as we spotlight Chris Heider, Risk Engineer of Cove Insureds. Today's topic is closing the gap in quality management. For more information on this episode and others, check out the Building Bite at www.buildwithproactive.com.
Welcome to the Building Bite Podcast, a podcast for construction contractors, owners, and insurance professionals, where you can hear from the experts about key topics that will help you be successful. I'm Chris Epps, one of the show's hosts and a senior director at Proactive, and I'm joined here with my co-host Mike Diercksen, our senior consultant of innovation and content solutions. Today we're taking a bite out of insurance with our guest, an expert in the SDI Risk Engineering space, Chris Heider. Chris is a risk engineer with Cove Programs. Chris, how are you doing today?
Well, great, guys. How you doing?
Doing well. Mike, how about you?
Doing great, Chris. We're going to have to delineate here between the two Chris's, but really good. Really excited to have Chris Heider on the show and get going.
Well, hopefully I'll minimize the talking on my part and we can focus on Chris Heider, let him do all the talking today. Today, we're looking to the future with our topic, closing the gaps in quality management. So great to have you on the show today. Chris, before we dive into our main topic, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, sure. I've only been with Cove Programs, whose parent company is the Optio Group, which is based in the UK since January 1st. My construction life actually started at Zurich Insurance. I was there for a little over 13 years. I was actually recruited into casualty insurance risk engineering there, but I found the SDI line of business shortly after my start, which I was a little more comfortable with my construction operations background. Most recently, prior to Cove, I was I worked for a claims consultant, exclusively working with carriers and insureds on SDI claims. And it's hard to believe, but I've actually been in insurance longer than I was in general contracting in an industry. But prior to my insurance life, I worked for a mid-sized general contractor here in Central Ohio for 12 plus years in various operations roles.
So, Chris, yeah, it's interesting because people always mention that they fall into insurance. It sounds like you've landed here and you've enjoyed staying here. For our listeners, there's an ever-growing market for SDI insurance. I know new carriers have joined the space recently. We're getting up to about 7 or 8 carriers that are doing that. But for those of us who maybe are unfamiliar with the coverage or not as well versed in it, could you give us a quick overview of what SDI is and maybe expand a little bit on why SDI underwriters would be so focused on a contractor's quality management practices?
Yeah, well, SDI policies, there are post-completion coverage terms and conditions. They vary with each policy and each enrolled project, but most always there's some sort of tail cover that's included for a designated period, anywhere from 2 years to 10 years after substantial completion of the covered subcontract, Historically, financial insolvency is the most frequent cause of SDI claims, but rework associated with improper and inadequate installations is the largest collective cost element in SDI claims. So if you think about rework costs outside of SDI claims, depending on what studies you read or look at, they can add up to be anywhere from 5 to 9% of total construction cost on any given project. But for SDI claims, it can turn into a 2x or more multiplier of an original subcontract value, depending on what stage the defects are discovered.
Yeah, we definitely see that as well. And I'm wondering, I know it's always easier for sometimes people in the audience to have an example to relay that to. Could you give us an example, Chris, of how some quality issues might trigger the SDI policy and maybe how that impacts the project?
So one situation might be some sort of a latent defect or a warranty issue that arises that needs to be covered in the tail period, and the subcontractor that completed the original work is either non-responsive or they don't exist any longer. I've been involved in situations like that. One was a roofing default down in Cincinnati, Ohio, and more recently a couple stucco failure defaults in Florida where the sub just didn't exist any longer, and we had to bring in a replacement. And then another example is where a sub would default some midway point in the completion of their work, and deficient work is discovered and needs to be addressed with the replacement subcontractor. This is a little more common situation that arises in many claims, which I'm sure you guys see as well.
Yeah, we certainly see a lot of that, Chris, and falls into the category of hindsight's always 2020, right? But certainly feels like a lot of these claims could be mitigated or even eliminated entirely with improved CQM quality management practices with insureds and GCs. In your experiences, what gaps do you guys kind of see in some of those GC quality management programs?
Well, the first gap would be in actual formal programming itself. There are kind of seven essential or key elements that I look for as it relates to formal programming. First is having a policy, a formal written plan and that plan would include, the inspection forms that are planned to be used. It would include a mission statement, and an executive or ownership within the company would champion or sponsor the plan. Second would be a quality philosophy. These are the behaviors that express a quality attitude. So the quality process is documented and budgeted for within the company. There's a dedicated quality director. There's training and education for quality responsible employees. There's some sort of a lessons learned process. And then there's also priority of quality over production for the contractor. Thirdly, would be in planning. You've got some roles and responsibilities established as it relates to quality management. And also in the planning stage, you'd have project document reviews or peer reviews, which are completed in the early stages for constructability and with corporate sign-offs on those. You've got regular QA/QC meetings that are planned and scheduled in the planning stages. There's a creation of a testing plan and deficiency tracking system. And a contractor with a strong pre-qualification system will help provide verification that any given sub that they're looking at meets some sort of minimum certification or quality standard needed for that particular scope of work.
Okay, I gotcha. Yeah, and you mentioned 7 steps there, and it seems like the ones you've mentioned so far, the first 3, all kind of start in the C-suite or front of office. But as we all know, effective implementation is obviously really crucial to that process. So how do successful insureds really nail down that process and get that information out to the field to put it into practice?
Yeah, well, they're going to have field practices and processes established with daily monitoring of the production of quality. They're going to utilize mock-ups as a quality standard, and those mock-ups can remain in place for comparative purposes until the work's complete. There's some sort of procedure for material verification. One of the actually earliest SDI claims of any significant size was tied to a lack of material verification. And lastly, there'd be some sort of formal closeout and turnover procedures for completing punch lists, commissioning, and document retention.
Okay, gotcha. And could you elaborate maybe a little bit further on some of the quality management field strategies on the back end as it relates to, as you approach project closeout and kind of move through course of construction, how does that change?
Well, as it relates to field processes, you're going to have pre-construction meetings with all your subs. There's going to be weekly sub-foreman meetings. The project supervision on a project is going to be routinely discussing quality with the subs, and there's a process for identifying, recording, tracking, and correcting deficiencies and nonconformance that's identified. That nonconforming work should be rejected immediately. And once you have completed work, it should be protected, and there should be some sort of contractual provisions for this. As it relates to mock-ups, examples of mock-ups would be full unit fit and finish mock-ups for residential type construction, exterior wall mock-ups that you could also do water testing on. You might mock up repetitive or difficult work. You might mock up some sort of rated assemblies or any kind of rated assemblies. You have walls, floors, ceilings. There should be some sort of lessons learned from the mock-ups, and those lessons learned should be published for everyone. And all the stakeholders at the project should be involved in the mock-ups as well: the GC, the owner, the subs, architects, consultants. As it relates to material verification, manufacturer's data should be checked against what's specified for the projects, and there should always be site visits made for any off-site fabrications. First work inspections and approvals can provide verification that the current drawings, that you're in compliance with the current drawings and approved submittals, and that those are being used as you get any given scope started. You can verify sub's method of approving materials and you can find out if you need to have any manufacturer's inspections or if the manufacturer should be there for any first work. Actually, I was involved personally in a couple of recent claim examples where we had stored or fabricated materials for a defaulted sub, only to find with the replacement sub that these materials were either in variance from the approved shop drawings or didn't line up the project specs, which added some additional costs to those claims. But in terms of after project closeout, there's always a formal warranty period, and there should be some warranty period provisions within the programmings with the contractor's programs that would have detailed strategies in place for ultimate client satisfaction.
Yeah, Chris, there's just so much there, and formal programming like this doesn't happen overnight, right? There's got to be a commitment to implementing this system and really getting the buy-in from the C-suite all the way down to the project teams in the field, because otherwise you could see how there's so many interchanging parts that you can easily see have things go through the cracks there. So how does an organization set themselves up for long-term success, right? I mean, are there other gaps that you're looking for in that process?
Well, the next gap would be, between that formal programming and the field implementation itself. So this is the quality control piece, the QC piece. This is the process. This is the daily monitoring that we mentioned before, which is accomplished through testing and inspection procedures that are established through evaluations and through the subsequent corrective actions. These are the field inspections and the use of inspection checklist and QM tools or software, the methods of testing and establishing certifications, and the use of third-party consultants for inspections as well.
Yeah, all great points, Chris. And based on, I think you and I kind of have a similar background in history coming from the operations side of construction. I couldn't agree more about QC being all about process and repetition and doing the same thing every time, making sure you're getting that process hammered out. Practice makes perfect, and, that provides the foundation really for mitigating a lot of claims, but also, unfortunately, in the event you have to document a claim, those things like third-party inspections and making sure you have consistency in all those processes really starts to be important. What would you say is kind of the next gap that you guys have identified beyond the initial formal programming and field implementation?
So the next gap would be between the QC steps, the quality control steps that are completed, and the documenting and communicating of those action steps. So if QC is the process, the QA part is the validation of that process. So this is the if a tree falls in the forest, does anyone hear it kind of scenario that, there's lots of good things happening in the field by work managers and supervisors, but we also need to assure that the documenting these efforts for verification of the effectiveness of the contractor's quality management program. So this would be the documentation we can fall back on to assure construction completed according to the standards that everyone agreed to on the front end. And more frequent validation means less construction defect potential for sure.
Okay. And so that leads us to maybe what would be the last gap following on that QC process. What's next?
Yeah, so I think the last gap that I see are the perceptions of the quality management culture between the different job classes in a company. So your executive management versus your project management versus your site supervision, and what their perceptions are of the success of their programming. So, many contractors have good quality management programs that are strong in certain areas, but there are few that don't have opportunities to improve for sure. So the best way I found to identify this is through some sort of perception analysis. This perception analysis was something that I was first introduced to as a concept that I was first introduced to in my casualty risk engineering days. And in the safety management realm, it was called cultural gap analysis there. But in the past, I've worked with several GCs on this idea using these self-administered surveys relevant to perceptions or grading of their programming on a number of quality management criteria, including commitment, accountability, training, processes, deficiency tracking, et cetera. But what we do is once these surveys are returned, the results are grouped in by job title, the different job titles within the companies, and we look for where the biggest gaps are for areas to provide focus for improvements. And we've had some really surprising results and have been identified, and some interesting conversations have ensued for sure.
Yeah, that's interesting, Chris, because it's one thing to create a plan, but you have to see it from start to finish, right? And the more elements to that plan, the more pieces of it, it's almost like the game of telephone. You could see how that message might get distorted all the way there. So it's interesting to kind of bring that back together and culminate those responses and figure out, hey, is the intended message from the C-suite the same message that we're getting on the project team? But with that being said, Chris, as we start to wrap this up, we always do like to give our listeners 3 takeaways from each episode. So with that, when it comes to this process, what would you recommend? What would be the big 3 takeaways for our audience?
First is, making sure that there's formal programming and some sort of executive commitment to the entire thing. And then there's going to be established testing, inspecting procedures, and tools for everyone to use to make the process uniform and efficient. And I think thirdly would be, an open mind for general contractors to realize that opportunities exist for most all the GCs to further develop their QM programming.
Excellent. And in addition to that, we do like to give an action item. So something that the listeners could start today, tomorrow. If you're looking at that QM program and you want to say, all right, we need to make some changes in a positive direction here, what would you say that first step could be? Something they could do today, tomorrow, really starting to move towards that direction?
Yeah, I'd say, the start is creating a quality mission statement or relooking or refreshing at the one you have. And I would suggest, engaging your employees and getting their thoughts on what's important to include in that statement.
Okay. And Chris, I guess before we wrap up, got a few more tough questions for you. One of them I'm really interested to hear is, what's your biggest challenge at work right now in your new role at Cove?
Yeah, I'm not sure about, and not necessarily a challenge, but I do note that, the construction economy is very robust right now. It's continuing to grow, which is good for all of us. And through all that, we in the SDI market just have to stay mindful of a good core programming and implementation of that programming for GCs that make them better contractors and good SDI customers.
Okay. And building on that, what are you seeing today that really gets you energized and pumped up about maybe SDI or the industry in general?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's any kind of GC partners that seek and engage in our risk engineering services and looking for opportunities to grow and get better. Those are folks that are fun to work with.
It seems to be a common through line, Chris. Everyone wants there's something about being open to learning and getting better. And there's something really enjoyable about that process. So one of the last questions, what might be something that our listeners would be surprised to hear about you?
Well, I have a fascination with bridge construction. So all of my college co-ops were on bridge projects, and I really enjoy reading books on various different bridge constructions throughout time and throughout world. That's something and around the world. That's something that I like to do is read and learn about bridge construction. Something I thought I would be involved in, from the early days, but didn't necessarily go that way.
Yep, I definitely know the feeling. I remember driving through the Lincoln Tunnel with my dad and being fascinated at, how did they build this in the river? And he had to explain the concept of going under the rock bed. So I definitely understand that fascination. And obviously, I am not in building bridges or tunnels either. So wrapping this up, Chris, this is the Building Bite. It's BIM Insurance Technologies with the experts. You are today's expert. We do like to ask everyone, what are you taking a bite out of today?
Well, I don't know about today, but in general, given that my wife owns a small business, we're very much shop small proponents. So we try to patronize the smaller family-owned eating establishments in the nice downtown area of Delaware, Ohio, which is real near where we live here. So I'm sure probably tomorrow we'll be hitting downtown Delaware.
Is there a favorite? Is it a sandwich shop? What do you think? What's the best one?
Well, I would say one that jumps out is Ohio. The food's okay, but they have a bit of a cocktail artist there, so we always like to go and see what she's got cooking as far as the drink of the week.
Excellent.
Nice. Very nice.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, thanks for chatting with us today. If our listeners want to hook up with you, where can they find you after the podcast?
Yeah, definitely on LinkedIn or Chris.Heider at OptioGroup.com. Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks again for your time, Chris, and look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Thank you for listening to The Building Bite. This podcast has been brought to you by Proactive. Check us out on thebuildingbite.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media for all future The Building Bite news and updates. You can also find us on your favorite apps, including Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Amazon. If you have ideas for episode topics that we should cover on the show, or you know somebody who would be a perfect guest, let us know at connect@thebuildingbite.com.